Martin here with Toll McAdoo from the Irish Politics Newsletter. We are talking today about changes made to the ESTA application for tourist visas by the Trump administration. I know at the end of the last episode, we promised we'd discuss healthcare today, but Toll, that was a little bit of a rookie mistake, I think.
Yeah, I think it might have been because once I went down the rabbit hole of the American healthcare system, I was up to my earballs. My eyes were watering. I was on my sixth cup of coffee, and I still could not get around the complexities of the American healthcare system. It was just...
If it makes you feel any better, we have no idea either. So we're kind of both in the same boat. So we're going to push that back till after the holidays, make sure that we can do that proper justice.
Yes, because it's going to take me 2 weeks over the holidays to research it properly, at the very least.
We have now ruined our Christmas.
Yes, and the wives and the kids, everybody's ruined. All their Christmases are ruined because two middle-aged men from Ireland and America want to do a podcast.
We will try and get our priorities in order at some point. But today we're going to talk about news from the Trump administration a couple of days ago. New guidelines on ESTA, which is the electronic system for travel authorization. This applies to tourists from 42 countries, including most countries in Europe. The core of the new guidance is that those who want to applying for a tourist visa now need to disclose their social media usage. Toll, you wrote about this in the Irish Politics Newsletter this week. I thought it was an excellent piece. Definitely a real tone of disappointment, frustration. I think you could even say betrayal. Do you think that's a sense that's shared more broadly in Ireland and Europe after the announcement of these guidelines?
It certainly is. And the headline of the article was "Landed Free and Home of the Hypocrite."
Yeah, it's a brilliant title.
And, you know, there's a riff on "Landed Free, Home of the Brave." I got thinking about social media and free speech, and J.D. Vance was in Munich and he said Europe was falling apart because of our lack of free speech. And we've had various State Department officials, various guys from Trump's cabinet come out and say, you know, Europe's gone to pieces. They don't believe in free speech anymore. But when we rock on up to the border and want to enter, they want to know, well, you know, how's your free speech? Is your free speech against America? Have you been saying bad things about Trump? And see, they're looking to check your social media history for 5 years. So I don't think our live tour of the United States is going to happen, Vince.
No, it's postponed until 2030.
Yeah, because
either that or get to deleting.
Yeah, I've been quite critical of the Trump administration. I think fairly. You know, we were taught growing up in 1980s Ireland, we had two choices. You either believed in communist Russia, where they controlled it, everything was under state control, or you believed in free speech, the land of the free, the United States of America. And now we find, oh, well, you know, the United States doesn't believe in free speech anymore, especially for people looking to come into the country.
Yeah, I think that's a fair critique. The response from Donald Trump himself, he was asked about this, and his response was pretty simple. He said, we want to make sure we're not letting the wrong people into our country. And so the devil's advocate question, I think, would be if somebody goes on Twitter and they post, I think Donald Trump should be shot in the head, or, you know, America is the great Satan, or whatever kind of vitriolic commentary, why should that person be let into the U.S.? It is something of a privilege for others to come here as opposed to a right, no?
Well, you're correct. I think if you're threatening to kill Donald Trump or any other, you know, political leader, you shouldn't be allowed into the country, full stop. But don't go lecturing the rest of the world about free speech. And, you know, you're right to say the things that you want if you're going to curtail other people from doing so. Now, Europe believes in free speech up to a point where you're not race baiting, you know, you're not being homophobic, you're not, you know, engaging in hate speech. We free speech rules, but we were taught that America had no rules when it came to free speech. It was the free speech Wild West, so to speak. The implication here, because it's coming from the Trump administration, is that if you're critical of Trump, you won't be left in. I think that's what it's about. I do not think it's about, you know, threatening politicians, because if you do that anyway, you're a stupid person and you shouldn't be left out the front door, never mind into another country. Somebody needs to take the phone off you. But
yeah, I think that's fair.
This is not about, you know, people saying stupid things on the internet. This is about people being critical of the Trump administration. That's what it boils down to.
The one spot where you could push back on this is, I think, again, the Trump administration would say, no, that's not what this is about. That if somebody goes online and says, you know, I hate Donald Trump, that's not going to be grounds for dismissal. Now, to be fair, we don't know what the grounds are. This is still kind of vague. And the other point that's worth making is there's 60 days of comment before these new guidelines are put into place. So it's possible they get walked back. It's possible they get changed. I am playing devil's advocate because I generally agree with you because, you're talking about the view of free speech in Ireland. It's absolutely sacrosanct here. There's almost a religious belief in free speech here that it's a key part of why we are the greatest country in the world, and we are raised to believe that we are the greatest country in the world, full stop. But one of the things that we're taught about free speech is that things that Europe does, hate speech laws, these curtailments, that it's a slippery slope. That's a famous metaphor that is ingrained into American discourse, particularly on the right, particularly from conservatives. And to your point, someone from the Trump administration can say, well, no, you can criticize Donald Trump just fine. Well, maybe if you have the right border agent, maybe if you have the right policy, maybe if you have the right administration. But the whole idea, the whole reason we have all these protections and the whole reason we take it so seriously is that we are taught, and we generally believe that once you start that process, it's going to keep snowballing of its own accord. And it shouldn't be just based on, well, this administration says it's okay. I'm sympathetic to the European opinion on that as being something of a betrayal, even if I think a lot of people might argue that it's much more narrowly applied so far.
Well, that's so far, but I mean, there is reports out there at the moment on social media and journalistic circles that people have been turned away at the border, journalists that have written critical things about Trump, Europeans, Canadians that have written stuff about Trump, and then they've been turned away at the border. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that's going on at the moment.
To be clear, that's for programs beyond what we're talking about, because those strictures are in place for immigrant visas and for other forms of visas. This policy's change is just to expand it to tourism. So it's basically now anybody who comes into the U.S. has to do this.
Yes, and the ESTA visa, yeah, it's particularly the ESTA visa. It's a big, long form. There's two things I want to touch on there. Like Donald Trump talks a lot about free speech, and J.D. Vance talks a lot about free speech. The whole administration keeps banging on about free speech, But today, Donald Trump is suing the BBC for $10 billion. $10 billion.
Yeah.
There's a word for that. It's called hypocrisy.
His lawsuits against the media, I think, generally have been quite frivolous, and most of them have been tossed. The BBC one, I don't think he has a $10 billion case, but the BBC, for lack of a better term, up pretty badly there.
Yeah, it was a bit of shifty editing and stuff like that.
It was, yeah.
But the BBC, as far as I can tell, can defend this in the United States. I think legally, I saw that somewhere online. Sure, the internet wouldn't lie to me. Don't have to defend it in the UK, and Trump will probably be laughed out of court. So
that's the history. But he gets his headline and he makes his point for sure.
I don't think it's about Johnny 3412 with a green frog avatar threatening to murder somebody. I think it's about people criticising Trump. He doesn't want people criticising him allowed into the States or anywhere near, the United States, full stop. I think that's what it's about, really.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's easy for them to say, well, if you're online criticizing the U.S., why do you want to come visit the U.S. anyways? That's a dramatically oversimplified view of the world. You can certainly criticize our foreign policy and still want to have a beer with somebody, in Times Square or in Faneuil Hall or whatever. One of the other ironies that Trump happily provided this week is that this policy pretty much implies that your social media persona, your social media content is a judge of your personality. And we're recording this a day or two after Trump posted a pretty vile commentary about Rob Reiner's murder, saying that if you're not familiar, he's an actor and director. He and his wife were stabbed to death by their own son. And Trump posted that he was actually murdered by TDS, by Trump derangement syndrome. And beyond the outrage over that post, in the context of this topic, there is quite a bit of irony there, because you could kind of twist that post into, well, if somebody posted something like that and about an American political figure, and I'd argue that Reiner actually is an American political figure. He's been a significant Democratic voice and fundraiser. You can absolutely see a border guard saying, nope, this is over the line. We don't want you. We don't want somebody who talks about our political figures like that in our country.
So let me touch on that just a second there. So Donald Trump, it was pretty despicable, and I think his most famous movie in Europe and Ireland was A Few Good Men. Did he direct that? I think, did he?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
That famous one, I think Jack Nicholson won an Oscar for that, was it? You can't handle the truth, that famous line
You
in the
can't handle the
courtroom.
truth is one of the most quoted movie lines in history, for sure.
Yeah, you see it all over the internet. And that's who Rob Reiner is for people who are not familiar with him in Ireland. So let's go back a bit there, right? Remember when Charlie Kirk died?
Of course.
The internet was awash with people being cancelled for the lax civility they'd shown to Charlie Kirk and his widow and his family and all that. People were cancelled all over the internet for that. It kind of undermines Trump's claims and the GOP's claims about, about being civil in politics. It just makes a mockery of, Trump looking for people to be civil after Charlie Kirk's death, and he couldn't be civil to a man who was murdered, a man and his wife that were murdered. Like, it just goes to the heart of the hypocrisy about the Trump administration again. Hypocrites. Yeah, we're for free speech, but, hand over your 5 years of social media history or you're not coming in, and again, that statement he put out about Reiner, he spoke about being civil after Charlie Kirk's death, and now he posts that thing to, oh my God, the man's not well in the head. Even if you have no interest in politics, you look at that statement and go, how is that guy president of the United States?
Yeah,
how?
He's had a couple lowlights in that vein, and that one might be the lowest.
It was just mad. Is he posting his own stuff? Does he have an intern do that, or is he posting that himself?
I have to believe he posts his own stuff. It's possible it gets transcribed, but we don't have any evidence to suggest that someone else is doing that. His voice is so unique, for better or for worse, that I think it would be difficult to imitate. And the other thing, too, people go, oh, maybe an intern's posting it. And people have actually made that argument to support him. Well, maybe he didn't post it. Maybe some intern did. If you think that the Trump administration is letting a intern use Trump's account as a sock puppet, I mean, the political risk of that is so beyond the charts. I mean, this is something that might, move his approval rating. Even some of the supporters in politics and in media have come out and said, this is just in terrible taste. I'm pretty loath to think that anyone in the White House would be like, well, just let some 25-year-old kid who used to write for the Babylon Bee, they can get Trump's voice close enough. I'm sure it'll be fine. He's the president. He's busy.
Like, kind of moving on from Trump there. So say you were coming to Ireland, and you've been to Ireland a few times, or France, and if you're going somewhere in Europe or Ireland, wherever, how would you feel about being asked to hand over your social media posts at the border?
For me personally, I would probably be okay, just because I have so far avoided the trap of posting anything stupid on social media. I'm an expert at writing something which is just really obnoxious or getting really mad and then going, okay, I'm going to delete this. If they can see my drafts, I'm screwed. I'm probably going to jail. But, it wouldn't affect us, our travel plans by any means. But I don't use social media in the way that some people do. And
is that a veiled dig at me, is it?
As you said, our plans for a U.S. tour are ruined.
When you're coming to Ireland, do you have to, is there a big form like I have to fill out if I want to go to the States? Do you have to answer any questions?
For us to go to the Republic of Ireland, no, it's passport, driver's license. You stand in a line. They ask you what you're doing, where you're going. It's remarkably simple. What I did not know until doing a bit of research for this episode is that is not true for Northern Ireland. And on our last trip, we violated the law. We went into Northern Ireland. We were illegal aliens.
All right, okay. Well, that's how all the illegal immigrants get into Ireland in the first place, is via Northern Ireland. 83%, I think. And I've heard other people say up to 90% of all illegal immigrants into Ireland come over the border. So,
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's not an enforced border. That's part of the Good Friday Agreement, of course. So, yeah, we did it the other way. And about 20 minutes after we crossed the border, our kid puked all over the back of the rental car. So we did get our punishment for breaking the law.
There you go, God's judgment. You've probably been probably in a Presbyterian village or something like that, and he smited you, struck you down. If I want to go to the United States, I have to fill out something called an ESTA form. Have you heard of that before?
I think I was kind of vaguely familiar with it, but until we were looking at it, and it hadn't occurred to me to put much effort into understanding precisely what it looks like.
You answer a number of questions online. They're yes or no questions, but some of the questions are wild, Vince. Some of the questions are nuts. One of the most amusing ones was, have you ever been arrested or convicted for an offence or crime involving moral turpitude? Do you know what moral turpitude is?
I do know what moral turpitude can refer to. I'm a little concerned as to what specifically they're referring to here.
The internet tells me it's, somebody that's vile or depraved or violating accepted societal standards of justice, honesty, or good morals, which is probably most of the Republican Party, if we're honest. So it's not strictly defined. So, I'm pretty sure I've done some bad stuff in my time. I've probably done some bad stuff in the United States in my time, which could qualify me as being morally of turpitudic behaviour. But how do you answer that?
The simple answer is you just answer no. I mean, even if you have a freezer full of body parts, it's probably not something that you confess to. At the very least, before you decided to come to the U.S. on vacation, you probably already figured out a way to rationalize it anyhow.
So there's another question. Have I committed any particularly severe violations of religious freedom? What does severe mean? Are mild variations okay? I mean, so say I went to Kildare and I decided to violate some Jesuits' religious freedoms, lock them in the shed for the night or something like that so they can pray. Or I was up in Cavan and I took it on myself to, have a go at some low church Protestants because of their, religious beliefs or something like that. Like that's skirting around the edges of, restricting moral freedoms. What exactly is severe moral freedom? I don't get that. I don't understand.
If you engage like a mass roundup of Protestants, you're not going to think that's severe. That was your job, right?
You'd wonder how anybody from Northern Ireland ever got into the United States. They spent 5 or 6 decades undermining each other's religious freedoms, which you'd wonder how they got in at all. I mean, there's some other one. Do you ever suffer from the plague? Right? Have you ever suffered from plague, Vince?
I have not, although every year or so we get an article about how it's making a comeback somewhere in Utah or something. But so far, knock on wood, I've dodged it.
Viral hemorrhagic fever. Okay, so I looked this up to see exactly what it was. Right, so you get this fever and you start bleeding to death within 12 hours of catching it.
Yeah, that's Ebola. We know Ebola well. That there was a panic about that a couple decades ago, and movies made about it and stuff. So Americans are actually oddly familiar with Ebola.
If you rock on up to the plane from wherever, from Shannon going to New York, and you're bleeding from every orifice in your body, I think they're not letting you on the plane.
You would hope you get stopped at security out somewhere along the way. Yeah.
The best one is terrorist activities. Do you seek to engage in or have ever engaged in terrorist activities, espionage, sabotage, or genocide? I mean, I've done some espionage and sabotage. I draw the line. I draw the line at the genocide, though. Absolutely not going there. Would never go there. No.
Yeah, it's such a perfect bureaucratic list. In the U.S. until, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, something like that, when you went to the airport and you checked in for your flight, they would ask you if you packed your own bags.
Yeah, we get that. We still get that, yeah.
It sparked all these terrible stand-up jokes and things, but no, some guy in a turban packed them, ha, ha, ha. But it was the same idea. It's just very much a box-checking CYA bureaucratic exercise.
Is it a case of that once you get into the States and you're a problematic character, and if they find you've lied on that, they can throw you out of the country straight away? Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, there may be some method to the madness there in the sense that they can get you on this sort of technical violation, even if they can't prove or they don't want to spend 5 years proving that you executed some criminal conspiracy in another country, that they can toss you out of there. Maybe a little bit of the famous thing that they caught Al Capone for tax evasion, not for, murdering dozens of people.
Didn't they bring a load of Nazis in after World War II to build your rockets for NASA? They were okay. They were all right. They were left into the country, no problem. I think they've committed a hell of a lot. They'd be answering yes to a lot of these questions, I think. So,
yeah, but those are the good old days. We didn't have online forums.
Well, I suppose this is true. They also want, this is coming down the line apparently, they want the names, the dates, places of birth of your close family members. I mean, God forbid you have a terrorist in family, which is kind of fair enough. You can see why that might be a bit of an issue. They'd want your siblings' names, your children's names. They want telephone numbers used in the last 5 years. So I'm sorry, Vince, you're And this is where it gets really bizarre. They're talking about looking for your DNA. Now, I know how that works. Do you lick the laptop? You upload your double helix as a PDF to the Department of Homeland Security, and they can see if you've been vaxxed or not, and they're not going to let you in if you've been vaxxed or you're trans or you have a mad eye or something. It's very authoritarian. It's very, very controlled, very, you do as we say, not as we do. You spoke about a slippery slope earlier, and I feel that the flip side of this is that it's a slippery slope towards full-blown fascism for the United States. I think it is a stepping stone. You're over there at the moment and you're thinking, no, I don't see any of this and things like that. But this is the way Europe feels at the moment, that the United States is slipping into fascism very slowly. History will show you that take one freedom and then another and then another and then another. And next thing you know, you're a refugee in another country.
Yeah, there are people stateside who have that same worry. You can imagine if this policy had been implemented by a Democratic administration, a lot of people on the right making exactly that argument, saying, oh, well, you know what's coming? Biden's doing this for the Europeans. He's going to do it for Americans next. Well, we go get our driver's license. We're going to have our social media account set to public so that the government can see all that. Within this administration, they would just say it's not authoritarianism because it's not Americans. They would take one way that you could criticize this policy and flip it around as support, which is that there are different rules for Americans and for foreigners. You know, again, to Trump's point, we need to know who's coming into the country and we need all this information. It doesn't mean that we're going to use all the information. It doesn't mean that if you post something critical of Trump or whoever, that we're going to ban you from the country. Again, I think that there's a very real slippery slope problem there. I'm also kind of fascinated by the idea, which is a big part of the immigration debate on the right, this idea that you need to know who's coming into the country. And I think one of the problems that they miss, you don't really get to know everybody who comes to your country. It's nice. It's a good talking point. It's all that.
Like, again, your social media is not going to actually adequately explain your personality, your intentions, unless you are threatening to murder somebody, unless you are threatening explicitly to harm somebody.
Right.
I mean, if you're engaged in nuance and sarcasm and kind of, deadpan humor, like, a lot of Irish people are famous for, you're not going to find out what kind of person or their intentions are from that, are you? Like, I mean, you're not going to be able to predict my behavior tomorrow because I'm critical of Trump today. You just can't do that
or
for
people
media.
who posted things that are a lot more incendiary, because people post that's incendiary on social media because that's kind of the point. The algorithm kind of pushes you in that way, and there's something inherently frustrating about some of those platforms, Twitter in particular. It's just not a predictive thing.
I can see this maybe not affecting the likes of you and me so much, but me anyway, trying to travel to the United States. But it will affect an awful lot of young adults who are terminally online, who are, prone to saying stupid things, and it stays up on the internet for the rest of their lives. I think this policy is going to affect a lot more young people than it would people our generation, I think.
And now, do you think that it is going to have a chilling effect more broadly? There already are some predictions that this would hurt visits to the U.S.
There is. Well, there wasn't polling done in Ireland. There was polling done in the UK. Was something like up to 50 to 60% of people will say that they absolutely will not visit the United States, full stop, after this. So,
pretty much because of this rule?
Because of this rule,
that? Yeah.
And that's a big lot. Tourism into the United States is down from everywhere: Canada, Mexico, France, Europe. It's continuing to plummet.
It has been an issue since Trump took office. We talked in the last episode about Europeans not being particularly enthralled with Trump. As far as we can tell, it's not Europeans saying, oh, I don't like Donald Trump, so I'm not going to America. It is a reaction to a lot of specific policies. You mentioned Canada. That's been a huge one for Las Vegas. Caesars Entertainment, that owns multiple properties in Las Vegas, they've said that weaker results this year are due in large part to the fact that visits to Vegas from Canada have fallen off a cliff. And that's because of Trump's stuff with making Canada the 51st state. That's hurt visits to the Northwest, to the far Northeast, places like Maine, what they call snowbirds, people from Canada who go to Florida during the winter to get away from the cold. Those visits are all down because Canadians were insulted by what Trump said. They don't want to come spend their dollars in America. They're going to go somewhere else. It's been a notable change in visits, and there are a lot of people in the travel industry who are saying that this is going to add to that pressure and push it down further. And there's a great irony to that, is this is all happening ahead of a year in which the U.S. is hosting the Football World Cup in 2026. Before Trump's term ends, we have the Summer Olympics in 2028. We have the Rugby World Cups next decade and the Winter Olympics. So the timing of this from that standpoint is also pretty rough, that there are a lot of people who are planning to come to the U.S. who, to your point, might be reconsidering.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an anti-American French person, which there's a lot of.
Yeah, that's all of them, isn't it?
I mean,
that's what we were raised to believe.
They're big fans of rugby. They're big fans of winter sports. They'll probably win the World Cup. I mean, you're alienating a lot of French there. I mean, there's a lot of tourists, just not going to come to the United States. Why you have the hassle? Why hand over 5 years of your social media life and whatever else they're demanding on day? Why do you have the hassle of that? Come to Ireland instead. Don't bother going to the United States, you know?
This discussion leads into that broader question where you just say, why are we alienating Europe? We kind of started this talking about a very narrow technical administrative decision, but it does get to this idea that the U.S. continues to alienate Europe for reasons that occasionally have some validity. I don't think the Trump administration's case that Europe needs to stand a little more on its own 2 feet militarily is incorrect. We've talked about that. I think that there are other aspects of policy towards Europe that perhaps make sense, but we are just kind of doing these things just for no benefit. We're pissing people off. We're hurting tourist numbers. We're losing soft power in Europe potentially so that we can catch somebody who posts on Twitter that they're going to come, punch somebody in the face in Times Square or whatever. You can kind of see the underlying logic here, but when you actually kind of talk about the practical effects, it just really makes little sense.
Yeah, well, I have one final theory. That is, last week, as he was making his announcement, the Democrats were releasing pictures of him in the Epstein files. And there was a lot of pictures of him with girls and young women. And that coincided with his announcement about social media rules. And I think the two, are not entirely unlinked or separate, I think.
The one thing I push back on that, I don't think that really works domestically, because we talked in the first episode about Americans kind of not paying attention to what goes on outside their border or even kind of at their border zones. I don't think that this is a story that's really made much headway in the U.S., certainly not enough to over.
Has it not? No, nobody's taken any notice?
No. There's articles in the mainstream papers or whatever, but the majority of Americans, I don't think, know this is going on. If they were aware it happened, they might kind of be vaguely aware. But yeah, it's not really a story here, but it's just part of the broader story between the U.S. and Europe. And I think it's a story his base probably likes it to the extent that they've heard about it, because again, that idea, we need to know who's coming, is a story that appeals. I think it makes sense at a high level, even if it starts to break down when you get lower. But it lines up with the national security document that they issued last month, where they're talking about, they're emphasizing that Europe needs to protect free speech and its sovereignty and all those sorts of things, while at the same time the U.S. is saying, well, you guys need to do all this, but also we're out of here. We'll see you later. But make sure you listen to us, even though we don't really want to be involved anymore. The hypocrisy that you talk about up front, I think, runs through a lot of the Trumpist attitudes towards Europe right now, where we want our cake and to eat it too. And then you go over to the Middle East, and the document argues that we should drop, quote, America's misguided experiment with hectoring these nations, especially the Gulf monarchies, into abandoning their traditions and historic forms of government.
Well, that's just them saying, you go on, keep being dictators. We're okay. We're going to try and be dictators here in America. That's exactly what it is. It's do as I say, not as I do. School of politics. For Europe, anyway, in regards to Europe, that's what he's saying. And the soft power America has had, is gone in Europe. It's gone. It's completely gone. So I talk to people in Brussels and Strasbourg all the time, every day. They just do not believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth. If he says he's going to do something, until he actually does it, you just don't believe him. That's where Trump's foreign policy has landed the United States at the moment. I don't see how you get this trust back under this administration.
I think what's interesting about this policy is it's a very narrow administrative move, of course, but it does highlight the Trump administration's broader view towards Europe. The Trump administration wants to pull back there, but maintain the historic influence that we've had, maintain the ability to kind of tell everybody what to do. And that, of course, includes Europe, right?
I mean, the document is a staggering contempt for Europe and its institutions. And the document does not go on to mention Russia in any great detail in relation to Europe. But, I mean, he talks about the civilization collapse of Europe due to immigration. And I think
Europe needs to restore its, quote, Western identity is an interesting turn of phrase there.
I think he's comparing Europe with America, and he thinks this is where America is going because of immigration. He thinks Europe is going to go the same way. And there's a fair whiff of racism off it, to be perfectly honest with you. You know,
I think there actually is.
There's a first bang of racism. You can smell that all the way across the Atlantic down here in West Cork. I mean, you can smell the racism a mile away, you know.
That charge gets leveled, I think, a little too simplistically and a little too easily. But if in that document, it's hard not to notice that Europe is supposed to reclaim its Western identity, whereas in the Middle East, it specifically says that the U.S. needs to stop telling them how to govern themselves. And specifically calls out the Gulf monarchies, which is basically, you know, in Europe, we want European-looking people to have free speech and democracy. But in the Middle East, you know, hey, look, if there's a repressive dictatorship that's led by a monarchy that's been in power for 100 years, who are we to quibble? Who are we to have an opinion? And that, I mean, you talked about hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has never met a dictatorship that he didn't like, you know.
No, he does seem to get along quite well with dictators. And
he has this weird kind of man crush on Viktor Orban in Hungary, and the Hungarian economy is the most corrupt in Europe. It's by far the most corrupt. Their economy is stagnating at levels, you know, not seen since the collapse of communism. And Trump admires Orban for what he's done with the media and what he's done with politics. And Trump has taken some leaves out of Orban's playbook. I see today that the jobless figures are up in the United States. They're up to 4.6%, I think. And there's a Trump statement out earlier saying, oh, the job numbers are great, they're fantastic, they're brilliant. I mean, this is exactly what Orban's been doing in Hungary for the last couple of years. Anytime there's bad economic news, he says the media's lying. You know, the media's lying.
Well, in this case, not only has Trump criticized the media coverage of joblessness and more recently affordability, they actually fired the person who was in charge of the job numbers a couple of months
collecting
ago.
The numbers,
Trump said at the time that they were, quote, rigged without any sense of evidence. I'm sure some American listeners, this is overwrought and, you know, kind of bring it back around, this idea that, oh, this social media policy, it's creeping authoritarianism. Where that argument starts to kind of build is in precisely what you said. It doesn't happen all at once. It's small, tiny steps. It's who's at your gates. It's what do we do about the jobs numbers? It's suing the media. These are all tiny, tiny steps in that direction. And I do want to do an episode about this next year because I do think that these moves, as small as they seem, they set us up for a situation where a big shock, a big surprise, a big change, it can really accelerate that slide in the wrong direction.
Yeah, if there is an AI bubble, and there's certainly a podcast bubble, if they decide to crash all around us, I think the shock to the economy will be quite severe. If things start to go south there, I think we're going to find ourselves, and the whole global economy is going to be in serious trouble. And how well will Trump's doctrine stand up to the scrutiny of global events like that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. All right, that's really enjoyed that discussion. We are going to squeeze one more episode in here before we take a break for the holidays, right, Tol?
Yes, we're going to see what happens with Micheál Martin tonight. As myself and Vince have been recording this podcast, the men in the dark suits have come from Micheál Martin and they're demanding his head on a plate. We don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, so maybe we'll touch on that, Vince, before we take a break for the holidays. So I'm Tull from the Irish Politics Newsletter.
And I'm Vince Martin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.